Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, and today we have a special guest we're welcoming onto the show because it's Eagles week. It's Giants-Eagles week. It's a big game coming up in the divisional round, so we need to preview it, and we need to bring on somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to the Eagles. And we got our guy. It's Mike Gill. He does a radio show on 97.3 ESPN in Atlantic City every day, 2 to 6. He also is the host of the Believe in Eagles podcast. Mike Gill, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing today, my friend? And I want to start by saying this. How's the feel in Philadelphia right now going into this divisional round?
As everything is in Philly, guys, there's always panic, right? There's panic in Philly. No one can ever have nice things. When teams are good, the Phillies went to the World Series. People complain. The Sixers, everybody complains constantly they can't get out of the second round, which is probably, there's merit behind that. The Eagles are 14-3. The defensive coordinator sucks. He needs to be fired. They'll drive him to the airport. The interesting part about this, guys, is if we asked our listeners last week to rank the teams they wanted to face in this game, the Giants were an overwhelming favorite. And now that the Giants have won, people are panicking. It's a great dynamic.
I love to hear that as a New York Giant fan and someone who covers the New York Giants. Hopefully that can manifest itself into something negative with the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think we should probably start with possible MVP, Jalen Hurts, and his shoulder. Now, he's not listed on the practice report right now, and I know none of us are doctors here. I don't want to speak for Mike, but none of us are doctors here. But what is the overall vibe around the team in terms of Jalen Hurts? Is the usage expected to be the same in terms of how they employ his skill set on quarterback power and how they just use his legs and rushing ability?
We'll find out Saturday night, man. I mean, they are keeping it close to the vest. They always do. Nick Sirianni is one of these guys. He just doesn't give you much. The intuition would be he played in an NFL game 2 weeks ago against the Giants and basically did nothing in that game. I mean, they basically kept it as vanilla as possible. They don't run, don't do anything. That was 2 weeks ago. This injury occurred 5-6 weeks ago. I mean, you go back to they played the Bears. When was that? They played the Bears in week 15. That was December 18th. You're talking about over a month ago that injury occurred. I got to imagine by the time they get to that game, he should be back and rolling, and MVP Jalen Hurts putting up 48 points on your ass.
Yeah, because I think the big question is, will he run, right? Because part of what is going to scare the Giants here and how they defend the Eagles is going to be, can they rush up that arc? Are they going to have to respect Jalen Hurts as a runner, because he will kill them as a runner if they don't? And so I think you're right. I think he's a lot healthier than people realize. The player I have a question on who might not be as healthy is Lane Johnson, the stud right tackle. And I think Lane Johnson is one of the best right tackles in the NFL. And if there's one chink in that armor in the offense right now, because I don't really see many at all, it might be if Lane Johnson is playing hurt or isn't able to play through the game or something like that, and the Giants can kind of take advantage of that right tackle position. Where's he at?
Yeah, he practiced yesterday. I mean, he's going to try to play. There's no doubt about it. He's going to try to play, but you're absolutely right. If he doesn't play, they are like 13-23 or something like that when he does not play. It is a significant. I think Lane Johnson, he just doesn't get recognized. He's a right tackle. Only left tackles generally get like kind of star recognition. He's the best right tackle. He's a Hall of Famer. He hasn't given up a sack in like 4 years. He barely gives up a pressure. When he plays, they dominate over there. They need him 100% because Jack Driscoll, who has taken his spot, just has gotten not very good reviews. He is a swing guy. He played some guard. If he has to play right tackle, they are much better off playing Mailata at right tackle and Dillard at left tackle.
Yeah.
But Stoutland doesn't like to change multiple positions on the line. He feels like the continuity is better only if one guy changes. So the Lane Johnson thing, Dan, 100% with you there. He's going to try. Nobody knows where he is. He definitely needs surgery. Ooh. Now, when they played the Giants the first time, he left that game with this injury. He said after the game, I could have returned if they needed me to. They didn't need him, and then he didn't play the rest of the way. So it's a pain tolerance thing. There was something yesterday, he's hoping to play the game without having to use like painkillers and just trying to gut it out. But if he leaves the game, that changes the dynamic 100%.
And that's something that all Giant fans are kind of afraid of right now. It's just the offensive line in general. Having Jason Kelce out there.
You should be.
He is significantly smaller than, say, in Dexter Lawrence, who's 342 pounds. But Jason Kelce, in the one-on-one matchups that they have played, he's held up, I would say, to a solid degree. Last time when these two teams faced each other, it was week 14. And what we ended up seeing was a ton of double, just pairs of hands on Dexter Lawrence. There was a lot of attention being paid to him because the Giants did not have Leonard Williams opposite him. I think it was Henry Mondo and Ryder Anderson with the defensive tackles playing next to Dexter Lawrence. So I wanted to ask you, how have the Eagles blocked up front when they are going up against two very talented defensive linemen? Like, let's forget about Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau for right now. I just want to talk within the guard box. How have the Eagles handled that? Because I don't know if it's going to be as easy to get multiple sets of hands on Dexter Lawrence if Leonard Williams is feasting in one-on-one matchups.
Well, listen, one of the things that people have talked about, we talked about Lane Johnson. They leave their tackles a lot of times one-on-one, Mailata and Johnson, and that's because they're very athletic in the middle. Sayamala has played center, left guard. He's played right tackle. Sayamala, their right guard, is very athletic, so they'll use him a lot on doubles in the middle. Landon Dickerson made the Pro Bowl this year in his second year. This was a guy that many people thought could have been a high first-round pick. He had major knee problems at Alabama. The Eagles get him in the second round. Many thought he was going to be the center to replace Kelce. Sayamala got hurt last year, so Dickerson went to left guard. Him and Mailata are so mammoth on that side of the line, they just left them there. And now they use Dickerson and Kelce on doubles a lot. Those two guys are so athletic. They both, and all three of those guys in the middle are all former centers, so they're all very athletic. They use a lot of doubles in the middle. So I think you'll see a lot of, you see Kelce a lot, bang, and get to that second level. You see a lot of that kind of stuff. You'll see them pull Kelce a lot. That's something that a lot of centers can do. They'll snap and get out and pull. So they use those three guys in combination a lot in the middle of the line. And look, they ran for, I know Miles Sanders had 17 for 177 the first time against the Giants. I think the Eagles are looking at teams and saying, look, our power against your power, we feel like we can win that battle regardless of how we get it done.
One of the primary ways you guys have been able to run the football so effectively, at least against the New York Giants, was by using that GH counter run where you pull the backside guard because, as you said, the offensive line is so athletic. And then the tight end would also come and he would kick out that blocker. I think the 40-yard touchdown run was a 12 personnel run out of that same exact look. Dan and I, we watch way too much New York Giants football. The Giants cannot fit GH counter. So I'm just curious, is that a base running play that the Eagles have been using all throughout the entire season, or is that something that was specifically geared towards the game plan of week 14 because the Giants really suck at fitting?
Well, and if my memory serves me, in that first game they played, Goddard did not play in that game.
He did not.
And he is their best blocking tight end. So that particular game, this is very interesting because they scored 48 in that game, and people were kind of surprised because Jack Stoll, who is more of a blocking tight end, and Grant Calcaterra, who's more of a receiving tight end, people thought that there was like a tell when those guys were in what the Eagles were going to do. Well, Stoll is the guy that they were able to get more creative with in the run game because when he was out there, he's a run blocking tight end. He is not a pass catcher. And that's where you saw them get a little bit more creative in the run game. And that particular game, like you said, Goddard was not in that game. He's a very good blocker, but they're so, they want to use him in the pass game so much. But when Stoll's out there, I think those weeks when Goddard was not there, they did add some wrinkles to the run game. But generally, this team is an RPO heavy run team. I mean, but that being said, you're right, Nick. You do probably watch way too much tape because I do the same thing. The Eagles run a lot of counter stuff. They'll move, as I said, Kelce. They'll get Kelce out moving. You'll see Mailata, shove and then break off. They do a lot of sweep stuff out to that side with Mailata and Lane Johnson because those guys are so athletic. But look, this run game is all predicated on Jalen Hurts making the right decision, reading the defensive end, finding the linebacker. And this year, the reason Jalen Hurts is in the MVP conversation, he made the right decision like 98% of the time. He read that guy perfectly. He knew when to give, when to take it himself. And if he's doing that, the Giants have that's a tough thing to stop. When he's reading right, the question is he rusty? He hasn't really played. We go all the way back to December 18th. This is the last time he really played in the offense. He didn't play in the offense in week 18. They just had him out there, just kind of leading, boom, boom, vanilla. Although, big question for me, you brought it up, Dan, about the Giants love the blitz. 50% of the time they blitzed Jalen Hurts this year in the two games. He has kicked their butt when they blitzed. Now, last week, they didn't blitz Kirk Cousins 22% of the time. I'm really interested to see if Wink Martindale can show restraint. Is he going to come after Hurts, or is he going to say, Hurts, you beat us? That, to me, is the chess match in this one.
Yeah, and I think what makes that so interesting, and I think he is going to blitz a lot more this week, because in that matchup against the Vikings, the Giants literally could put those split safeties back there, not blitz, and still stop the run for the most part. That's just not going to be the case against the Eagles. If they don't commit extra bodies to the line of scrimmage, they're not going to stop this run game. Like you said, there are elements to this run game that you brought up where they're moving Kelsey or Jordan Mailata's on the move. All those elements kill the Giants. Giants have no answer right now for power and gap. It's not like they can even scheme around it. They don't have the personnel to stop these players. Kelsey, for alone, is just like all world when it comes to on the move as a blocker for a center. No one is really at his level. It's almost like a cheat code. So that scares the hell out of me. And I think you'll see a lot more blitzing and a lot more guys on the line of scrimmage for that reason. But what I wanted to ask you about, Mike, because it's something I've heard all year about the Eagles. You talked about how a lot of it is RPO based, their offense. And I've heard like Ben Solak talk about the Eagles. And every time I hear him, he's like, because we watch a team with Mike Kafka and the Giants on offense. We'll get to that side of the ball soon, where every week there's something different. There's new wrinkles in the run game. There's new wrinkles in the pass game. It's this ever-evolving offense that changes week to week based on the opponent. What I've heard about the Eagles is that's not necessarily the case. They kind of run their system out there, and it is what it is. What have you kind of gathered from what they're running on offense of Sirianni? Is that true or is that not true?
No, it's very simple. I mean, it's all based on, as I mentioned, Hurts making the right decision. He is an elite decision maker, and it's on all three levels. Look, this is a RPO, but it's also an RPP. They pass out of the same thing where he makes a decision. Does he want to give? Does he want to keep? Does he want to throw? They've added that element. It's really a 3-layer decision that he makes where he is making all these reads in real time live. And that's what has made him an elite player this year. He makes the right decision. But yes, it is a very simple system. You know, it is read and react. And that they are trusting Jalen Hurts' ability to read and react to what he's seeing in real time to make the right decision. Do they run? You don't see them line up under center, turn around and hand the ball off very infrequently. Very infrequently. It is all Miles Sanders. By the way, do you like Boston Scott?
No, we don't.
For you guys. Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell. Those three guys are all a big part of the run game, but it's all Jalen Hurts making the decision. So, you know, as you mentioned, Mike Kafka, who played here, Northwestern, smart guy, they are not adding new wrinkles week to week. They are just executing their stuff to a high level. This league is about preparation, execution. That's what it comes down to. The Eagles, I think we can all come to kumbaya here. The Eagles are way more talented than the Giants are. The Giants are here is because Brian Daboll, when the Eagles fired Doug Peterson, he was the guy that I wanted to coach the Philadelphia Eagles. That was the guy I wanted. The Bills blocked him from interviewing here. I don't know if he even wanted to come here, but he, to me, was the home run hire of the offseason. You're seeing why. This roster is the same roster they had last year. It stinks. The roster stinks. You guys know it. They didn't make any moves. They didn't think this team would be here. That shows you preparation, execution. Daboll excels in those areas. They got a great staff, but the Eagles are way more talented than the Giants are. But it goes back to your question, Dan. The Eagles execute the simple things, and they do it flawlessly for the most part.
Yeah. So it's going to behoove of the Giants to stop that. Now, looking at I know. Looking at the Giants defense, Wink Martindale wants to get as many defensive backs and speed on the field to not have their linebackers out there. And I think it's going another interesting chess match between these two teams is how much 12 personnel the Eagles use and how successful the Eagles will be on first down. Because when the Vikings came out, ask Dan, when the Vikings came out in 12 personnel, Wink Martindale didn't respect it. He was like, we're going to stay in our nickel package. We're not even going to go to base. But when they switched to 21 personnel with CJ Ham, that's the only time they would check the base. And some of the most explosive plays that the Vikings had in the game was when the Giants were in base. I don't think the Giants want to be in base, but they're going to respond to the Eagles in 12 personnel using base because they are a little bit scared. Now, that's, I think, also going to come down to down and distance. So if the Giants get some early stops on first down and then the Eagles decide to use 12 personnel on, say, like a second and long, I think the Giants would respond with nickel or maybe even a lighter type of package. But I wanted to ask you, with Dallas Goedert back, with all the weapons that the Eagles have at the wide receiver position, how much 12 personnel do you think we're going to see on Saturday night?
That's an interesting question because, as you mentioned, what the Eagles do, I talked about this the other day on my show. It's okay. Dory Jackson and McKinney did not play the first time they
Or
blitzed.
Leonard.
That's a big change in the secondary. They blitzed. The Eagles said one-on-one. And even in the last game they played, the Giants blitzed. They threw the ball down the field. A.J. Brown, 37 yards. I mean, you're going to try to go one-on-one man with Brown. Hurts will throw it up, and he trusts Smith and Brown. Is that going to be the case? Dan, you think they're going to blitz. If they do that, are the Eagles going to go one-on-one on the outside and say, look, try to stop those guys? The big question is, if they try to take a shot early, Dory Jackson makes a play, breaks it up. Okay, now you said our corners are up to the task. What are you going to do with Goddard? That's where this team gets really tricky. And you ask about 12 personnel, 11 personnel. They generally will go with Brown and Smith, and then you've got Quez Watkins and Goddard. And Watkins is the guy that gets lost in the sauce a lot. The game they lost to Washington, he hits the seam, bang, 7 route down the middle, wide open, catches the ball, gets tackled, and fumbles. But the thing is, he's open because you have to put so much attention on the outside guys. So if the Giants are better in the secondary, do they have enough depth to keep up with Goddard and Watkins? And, oh, by the way, you've got this run game, and you've got to account for Hurts. So the Giants might keep changing it up. The Eagles can keep doing what they're doing and still change it up while doing the same thing. They can keep their 11 personnel on the field and still say, because they're so deep. This is like the 49ers. You're like, all right, how do I defend Debo, McCaffrey, Kittle, Ayuk? If you take one guy out, okay, we'll just roll to the other side. And that's what makes them so difficult to defend. And by the way, their offensive line, as we chronicled, is very good. So I don't know how much 12, they even go 13. They were going 13 at sometimes. You'd see Calcaterra and Stoll and Goddard on the field because Calcaterra is a guy who will catch the ball. They don't do that often, though. More in the red zone, you'll see that kind of deal. But I think more 11. If they go man on the outside, big days for Goddard. Hawkinson had a big day last week. Everyone's talking about that. Oh, now Goddard can have a big day. Well, Quez Watkins is another guy who gets lost in the sauce, but seam routes is what he does and hits them, every so often. Bang, that seam down the middle.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a possible negative for the Giants as well because, you put the stress on those seam routes and you have Darnay Holmes there in the middle trying to defend Quez Watkins. Darnay Holmes is a great defender around the line of scrimmage against screens and things of that nature, but in coverage, he gets grabby. We're going to see potential holds there, potential pass interferences. Though overall, it's like kind of pick your poison, I feel like, for the Giants right now, because I personally would rather the Eagles be in 11 because if they're in 12 or 13, the Giants, I just don't know how they're going to stop them really because they don't have like Nick said, some of the worst plays we had on defense last week were when the Vikings went to 21, the Giants had to put those linebackers on the field, and then Jared Davis is lost in coverage. And you just have examples of these guys who can't hold up. But what's interesting most to me about this matchup in relation to the personnel groupings is I was looking at it yesterday. I think it was shout out to Giant fan in Charlotte. I almost said Connecticut again.
Jeez, come on, Dan.
Yeah, at this point. He put out numbers about how often the Eagles use no huddle. And at home, it's so much easier to use no huddle and tempo than it is on the road. And the Eagles are obviously at home. If they're in some kind of up tempo, no huddle, and they get the Giants with their base personnel on the field because they're running 12, then they can really stick it to the Giants because now the Giants can't sub out these guys. So do you think we're going to see some no huddle, some tempo again in this game and kind of try to pin the Giants in the personnel grouping they're stuck in?
Yeah, it's interesting because I brought up the fact that Hurts, they might do this early to try to get Hurts back in the rhythm early. Just, hey, you haven't played, just go, go, go. And it's something that I would not be shocked if they got into. And you mentioned, getting the team stuck. I think, we look at the Eagles the last couple of weeks and people talk about, wow, they just haven't looked the same. A lot of this has coincided, one, with Hurts being out. Two, people forget Avonte Maddox and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson both left the defense. And as you mentioned, if you get the situation where the Eagles were in that spot, teams went after Kaiser White and they were hitting. CeeDee Lamb crushed them over the middle. I don't know that happens with Maddox. Now, Maddox is not going to play in this game, but what the Eagles have done, And they have moved Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to the slot, and they have kept Blankenship in the safety spot. So teams now are not as apt to go after that slot spot. The Eagles, when they run tempo like that, it's normally because they have a matchup that they like. They see, as you mentioned, somebody's on the field, we're going to keep attacking them. Because you'll see games where A.J. Brown gets 4 or 5 catches in the first drive and then kind of doesn't hear from him the rest of the game because then the team says, all right, we're making our adjustment. You're not going over there. So that'll be interesting if they come right out, get Hurts going, find that matchup that they want, and go after it. If the Giants show something wrong, and this is Dan and Nick, where what Martindale does to me is so enticing. Is he going to blitz or is he going to sit in soft zone like he did last week? If the Eagles see that, are they going to go tempo to keep those guys on the field, or are they going to say, let's lay back and get them into the defense that we want to get them in? That's where I think Martindale kind of showing a different side of himself last week. Really, I mean, that was significantly different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys watch them all the time. I'm watching the Giants. I said, is John Gannon coaching this defense? What's going on here? That to me is big. I think what Wink Martindale's game plan is a huge factor in this game.
It's certainly a huge factor in this game. And that's, again, what I'm a little bit afraid of is you guys coming out in 12 personnel on first down, Giants matching in base, and then just tempo, keep the Giants base personnel. You're going to get mismatches with Gerard Davis up against Dallas Goedert. One of those safeties is going to have to roll down to cover Devonta. It's a situation that I'm a little afraid of, to be real, because we didn't have to experience that against the Vikings because the Giants and Wink Martindale just didn't respect the Vikings' ability to run the football. But as we know, the Philadelphia Eagles have one of the best rushing attacks in the league. One more question on the offense I have that's kind of a stupid question anyways, but how real is the whole Boston Scott giant killer thing in Philadelphia? Do all the fans talk about it? Is it one of those things when when the Giants are playing the Philadelphia Eagles, everyone's like, oh, it's Boston Scott
He's
time.
like plus
kind of
400 to score a touchdown in this game, which is hilarious because those odds have dropped from like plus 1,100 the last 2 times they played.
Yeah. In fact, you know how many people will bet Boston Scott to score the first touchdown?
Yeah.
In fact, he did in the game the other day. That happens all the time. Yes, it is a real thing. You know, I have a little text message group we do on Sundays, give a guy and Boston Scott when the Giants, everyone goes Boston Scott. It is definitively laughed about here about why he has. Now, he's a guy that I think the Eagles could use more. They could probably utilize whenever Miles Sanders has not played and Boston Scott has had to pick up the load. It just seems to be against Giants teams, but he's had games against other teams. He does a good job. It's just against the Giants. So it's a real thing. We do acknowledge that here. Now, can he get a touchdown in a playoff game against the Giants? We shall see. They don't use him all that much against other teams, but the Giants, he's ready.
Let's flip it to the other side of the ball now. You mentioned earlier, one of the first things you said, Mike, was in Eagleville. I call it Eagleville. That's like a nod to my dad. Shout out Ron Schneider if you're listening. He always used to call the Eagleville or like Dallas, whatever it was. And in Eagles Nation, let's call it, you mentioned how, some fans are like, oh, we're out on Gannon. We don't like what Gannon's done as defensive coordinator. I was watching a breakdown earlier today from Dan Orlovsky on ESPN, who was basically saying, like, look, a lot of what the Eagles are doing on defense schematically is similar to what the Vikings are doing, which I found a little bit of a stretch because the Vikings defense, we just watched it last week, was just so many coverage lapses and so many breakdowns that I doubt we'll see with the Eagles. But he said just like core bones of it schematically. So
yes.
what exactly is the reason why Eagles fans are kind of out right now on Gannon and any kind of thing that you think is maybe like a deficiency in his system that the Giants can exploit?
Yeah. Number one, they do play the same defense. It's a Vic Fangio concepts. The difference is Minnesota doesn't have the talent to run that defense. They stink. They're slow in the secondary. They don't get enough pass rush. Their communication breakdowns are evident all the time. And that's a big thing in this defense. Communication. The Eagles have corners. You know Bradbury pretty well. Well, thanks for giving him, for cutting him. He's having a really good year. Last year, Steve Nelson was on that side. Not good. Nelson's just one of those guys. You had to play him so far off the ball because teams are running past him. The defense, Dan, is predicated on not giving up the big play. And why it works for Philly is because they can rush 4, and rushing 4, they can cover, and they don't give up plays over the top. Eagle fans don't like it because Buddy Ryan, Jim Johnson, Bud Carson, those guys blitz, and hit the quarterback. You can't do that in today's game. Like, you hit the quarterback, you're getting 15 yards. So it is a big battle between these fans who want to see pressure, but blitzing pressure. They don't care about 4 guys getting there because it doesn't always work. But the Eagles will have games where they'll let you catch the ball underneath and kind of nickel and dime yourself up the field. The thought process is that you will have to go on multiple double-digit play drives to score on us. And if you go on a 10-play drive and it results in a field goal, we win.
Right.
If you go on a 10-play drive, there's going to be a penalty in there. If you go on a 10-play drive, we got a big sack or we got an interception. And in the first half of the year, they had 20, they're plus 20 in the turnover category. They were getting the sack, the interception. And that's why they were dominant. Now, they had some injuries, and that changed the dynamics of their defense. But yes, they run the same defense as Minnesota, but they are more talented than Minnesota. They ran the same defense last year and stunk. They didn't have the personnel to do it. Linval Joseph, he changed the run defense. Jordan Davis, they drafted. He got hurt. They brought Joseph in. That helped them up front. But this is all predicated on getting pressure. They have 4 guys with double-digit sacks. And keep this in mind. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson leads the league in interceptions. He missed 6 weeks. He's a playmaker. And that's what this defense is. Sacks, interceptions, pressure, hurries, and long drives. If you're going to take a long drive, good luck. That's the premise.
So basically, it sounds to me like all these Eagles fans who are disappointed in Gannon are just kind of holding on to yesteryear, and they just want to blitz out. There's no real actual reason behind. Okay, that doesn't make me feel better. Any better, Mike?
I would agree. Yes, it is that whole concept of I grew up with Gang Green, and I grew up with Buddy Ryan and Jim Johnson, and they always blitz. This team has more sacks than any of those teams. Buddy Ryan never won one playoff game ever. The Jim Johnson teams, they were great with Andy Reid, obviously, as the head coach. But look, they came up small in a lot of playoff moments. Carolina, the defense wasn't the problem in Carolina. Obviously they scored 9 points in that game. But the Tampa game, Joe Jurevicius running wild against them. They lost that game to Arizona in 2009. I will say this: if they lose this game to the Giants, I'll say this now. It would be the most disappointing playoff loss above all of those, because of the talent disparity in this game. It just flat out would be, because the Eagles are 14-3. They have home field advantage. If they lose this game to the Giants, who, look, I think the Giants have come a long way. I totally love the coach. I think they're in the right direction. I think this is going to be a 10-year run between these two teams hanging out here, I hope anyway. This Giant team is where the Eagles were last year. They got to the playoffs, and it was like, holy crap, we made the playoffs. Them winning the game far exceeds. This is not an NFC championship roster. I think we all can acknowledge that. That's why if they win this game, it would be an utter disappointment and complete failure of a season if they lose this game.
It's one reason why we call this coaching staff the ultimate maximizers, because they're maximizing all of their talent. I want to ask you, Mike, as somebody who covers the Eagles, what do you want the Giants' offensive approach to be? Because we have seen recent success through Daniel Jones and a quick passing attack where if he doesn't love what he sees, he's using his legs and he's using them effectively. But we all know Saquon Barkley is a star running back, one of the best in the league. And I'm even going back and forth, and I'm sure Dan and I will talk about this soon, on what the primary approach of Mike Kafka will be, if they'll lean a little bit more on the run, lean a little bit more on Saquon Barkley, because the Minnesota Vikings were just terrible at defending the pass. So as someone who covers the Eagles, what would you prefer the New York Giants to do? And what do you think the Eagles are best at defending?
The Vikings are the worst pass defensive football. They stink. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel Jones has 2 300-yard passing games, maybe 3, but 2 in the last 5 weeks. They both came against the Vikings. Other than that, he hasn't thrown for more than like 200 yards. So you would say we would want to see Daniel Jones have to throw this team to victory. That said, when the Eagles play the Giants in week 14, everybody, you talk about Boston Scott bet, everybody said, oh man, Daniel Jones is going to run over. I think the over-under was like 37, 42 yards, something to that. He had 4 carries for 27 yards in that game. So we're like, what happened? Because quarterbacks have got out and run. In that game, though, and I don't remember, did Saquon, was he hurt? Did he get banged up? Did he try to play? He only had 8 carries in that game, but 9 carries last week. And I said, if you had 9 carries from Saquon Barkley in a playoff game, you lost. So I would think that the Eagles want to try to limit Saquon's touches because they are far superior in the secondary than Minnesota, and say, Daniel Jones, try to go after Darius Slay, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and James Bradbury. And if you win beating us that way, good luck with that. But we're not going to let Saquon Barkley do for Philadelphia to lose. It's the Washington game. Sloppy, turnovers, bad down and distance. The Commanders got 3rd and short all game long because they stuck with the run. They ran the ball like 50 times in that game. So if the Giants follow that and hand the ball to Saquon, they're going to be in good down and distance, you wouldn't think, all day long. If they panic and get out of it, that plays into the Eagles' hands. Washington never panicked. Now, since then, that made the Eagles say, all right, we got problems up front. We had no Jordan Davis. We went out and got Linval. Let's go out and get Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh to help that run defense. And it's helped to some extent. But I would say, to answer your question, Nick, you got to make Daniel Jones beat you. You can't have the best player on the field, Saquon Barkley, running wild. And the Eagles have done a good job of that. 8 carries the first time. They limited Daniel Jones to only 4 carries in that game. And I think they sacked him 7 times. We saw Tyrod Taylor late in that game. He got sacked 3 times, for God's sakes. But the Eagles, 7 sacks in that game, and they create all sorts of havoc. So it's let Daniel Jones try. I mean, Hodgkins, nice story. Come on. He cannot – you can't have him running wild against this secondary. It should be a clear victory in terms of Eagles secondary against Giants receiving core.
Dan, I wanted to get your opinion on this because I feel like that week 14 game against the Eagles just fell at such an interesting spot in the season because the Giants had just tied Washington. Washington ends up going on a bye week, and then the Giants are playing this Eagles game where they're likely going to lose. At least that's what everyone was saying. They go out to a 21-0 deficit. And they know they have this really important primetime game the next week against a well-rested team. I really think the Giants, they didn't mail it in, but they were like, we're not going to put Daniel Jones in a position where he's going to consistently take hits. I think that's one reason maybe why we didn't see as much Daniel Jones rushing. And in terms of Saquon Barkley, that I am confident to say. They were like, look, we're down big. This game's over. Let's just get Breida and Brightwell in there. Saquon Barkley, you just take a rest. A couple weeks ago, you just had 35 carries in a game. We're not going to put this load on you. And also at that time, he was kind of ailing with the shoulder injury. So I think that approach from the Giants also stemmed from the fact the Eagles just jumped out to a 21-0 lead early.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think Mike and you nailed it when Mike said, oh, I was so surprised that Saquon Barkley only had 8 carries. Well, he was playing through an injury at the time. He was banged up, and they were just like, look, we're down 20. Like you said, we're down so much. Why risk a re-injury here? And it's really, that's the most interesting thing about this game to me, because I think Mike's right. Look, the talent deficiency is so obvious. Anyone who argues the opposite as a Giants fan is really living in la la land, because I could go through it right now. Cornerback, linebacker is an unbelievable difference. Defensive line, they're much more depth there. Their offensive line, their receivers, so their tight ends. So you have that there right there. But it is true at the same time that while the Giants did get blown out in that first game, they didn't have Xavier McKinney, who makes a massive difference. They didn't have Adoree Jackson, who makes a massive difference. And they didn't have Leonard Williams, who makes a massive difference. And then, as you just mentioned, they didn't really have Saquon Barkley. They didn't really have the full Daniel Jones because they didn't want to run him and get him hurt. So that's the biggest, like, if you're looking for anything, like, at least can the Giants make this thing close and keep it competitive? That's the reason why right there. But I think that's also why you kind of look at that first game like, I don't know how much you can take away from that, because when you have your 3 of your best defensive players not on the field, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
3 of your
no
best,
question.
not your 3 best. Yeah.
There's no question that first game, I was watching that game and I said, in the NFL, you see teams, you'll watch Houston play somebody, they're not as talented, but very few times are you watching the game and you're just like, the talent disparity jumps off the page. I mean, heck, Houston goes to overtime with Kansas City. They almost Dallas. Heck, they gave Philadelphia problems, but we know the talent disparity is there. Houston fights hard. They're well prepared and well coached. That game, that day, the talent disparity jumped off the television. That Philadelphia is just here and New York is here. How will that change? I think it's going to change. I don't think you're looking at 48-22. Now, the flip side would say, well, the Giants just played at Philly with basically a bare bones skeleton crew and almost won that game. I don't know that we can take much from that game either. I mean, really, I think Philadelphia is going through the motions, just trying to get through the game without injury, and they're up 19-0, and they got in like, all right, we have a lead. Let's just kind of get out of here. So I think it'll be interesting. The one thing with the Giants is, look, again, I have no hate for this Giants situation. I think it's been a great story. I love when Eagles Giants play. It's my favorite. Eagles Giants, those 2 weeks are my favorite week. The whole Cowboys thing, I think, is this Hallmark holiday type of thing where people just, like to hate the Dallas. Giant fans, I have respect for it. They know their zip code. They have civic pride. And when their team stinks, there's no excuses, man. They stink. They know it. They don't say it's the ref's fault. Everybody hates us. Everyone's trying to, no. The Giant fans are good, smart fans. The Cowboy fans, we could do a whole thing on that. But 2 months ago, the Giants were 7-2. They've won 3 games. 3. So I don't know. Like, they beat the Vikings twice, by the way, and I have not been a Viking guy all year long. The Vikings played Philadelphia, got Rochambeau'd, played Dallas, got smoked, played Green Bay, was not competitive. Whenever they took a step up, really, the Buffalo game for them was their signature moment of the year. I can't understand how they won that game, but this is a huge step up for the Giants, no matter how we slice this thing. And the game on week 14 and the game in week 18, somewhere in the middle, this game will be on Saturday night.
I think that's a good take.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate this. This was an awesome talk. You know ball. So we'd love to have you on any other time. And if you ever want to talk to us again, same goes. We like to end this show the same way we always end our previews. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. I always give that caveat. But would you like to, and would you give us a prediction on the game?
I said 30-20 Philadelphia. 30-20 Philadelphia. Just too many weapons, man. The Eagle. Look, the Giants are not facing the Vikings defense. That's the difference for me. The Vikings defense just stinks, and the Giants offense is limited. I think the organization is going in the right direction, but this is not an NFC championship team. 30-20 Philadelphia.
Nick, how about you?
All right, if we're going to do that right here, look, I want to go with the New York Giants really badly, but I do believe the Philadelphia Eagles will win this game. I think they are the more talented roster. I think a lot of it will come down to Jalen Hurts. If Jalen Hurts takes an early shot and he's uncomfortable, anything can happen in the game. And I don't think the Giants are going to get blown out. I think, just as Mike said, the Giants have had a fantastic season. I think the New York Giants are getting maximized by this coaching staff, as we always say. But I'm going to say Eagles, let's go with 24-20.
Okay. I'm going to take a look at this game and say, for starters, I've been pretty damn good on picking Giants games this year. I picked them to win last week, and they won. I've picked losses. I've picked wins, right? I think I'm over 85% at this point. But I did say last week would be a little bit more of a blowout win for the Giants. I thought they would win by multiple scores, and they didn't, but they were ahead the whole game, so it felt pretty good. This game feels a little different to me. I don't like that it's outdoors in Philadelphia. I think it's going to be cold. I don't like that it's at night. It's going to be even colder. I think that helps the Eagles as well. The talent deficiency is there. I think the Giants are going to turn the ball over a little bit more than their season average in this game. I expect 2 turnovers, unfortunately, from the Giants offense that could define this game. And so I think the Eagles will put up a lot of points. I think the Eagles are going to score 34 in this game. I think the Giants are going to get to about 20. So I'm going 34-20 Eagles, unfortunately. I do think the game will have some moments where it's close, though, and I think ultimately those turnovers will define the game and put the Eagles a little bit out ahead. But unfortunately, I can't go with my heart on this one. I got to go with my head, and I think this is where the run does end. But you never know. Like you said, I think Nick made a good point. If somehow, some way, and I know Wink Martindale's going for it. Like, look, we're not talking Bounty Gate. This is not what Nick and I are ever like advocating for, but it's football. It's a physical game, and I think that Wink Martindale and those defenders are going to be attacking early against Hurts. And if they get a hit on him and it changes the way he can play, that could change the whole game. But that's this prediction for us. Mike, thanks again for joining us. Why don't you wrap up by telling everyone where they can find you on Twitter and social media, and then where they can listen to your show?
Monday through Friday, 2 to 6, 97.3 ESPN in Atlantic City. And at Mike Gill Show on Twitter. Obviously, we're kind of like right in, a lot of Eagles down here, but we got a lot of New Yorkers because of the casinos. So a lot of Giants Eagles week. We get a lot of good engagement those weeks. So, we're getting ready for that. And we carry the Eagles game. So if you're somebody that's in the Atlantic City market and you're in your car on Saturday night, kind of bar hopping around, don't drink and drive, but you can pop the game on if you're going from one place to the other. We do carry the Eagles down here in Atlantic City. So, yeah. And
I take some day trips occasionally down to AC, especially in the off season when work is slower, with a couple buddies to gamble a little bit and to have some fun down there. So from this point on, Mike, I will be throwing it on ESPN down there. I'm going to be listening for you because I really like what you had to offer today. This was a great show. You're great at this. So thanks again for joining us. We had a great time. To all the other listeners, have a great rest of your week. And as we always like to end this bad boy, go Giants.